tribunal. It only takes a couple of weeks to read it. For something shorter, look to Robertson's report for victims of communism last year. Third, no more reforms. The Chinese had their chance in 2012. There were plenty of fellow travelers in the TTS, the Transplantation Society, the Vatican, and the World Health Organization to hold their hands during that process. Now, the world would have probably ignored the death count at that point. All that Beijing had to do was to stop harvesting fallen gone. Instead, the Chinese transplant system continued and then doubled down on the Uyghurs. Okay, so turning to the yeses now, the West is faced with a nearly identical challenge that we faced when we discovered that Soviet psychiatrists were torturing political dissidents under the cover of mental health. There are three differences now. First, we actually know more about the Chinese transplant system than we ever knew about the Soviet mental health system. Second, Western medical representatives claim they believe in China's transplant reforms, even as Huang Zhifu is openly calling, Huang Zhifu, the master of ceremonies for China on organ harvesting, is openly calling for more transplant volume. By contrast, the World Psychiatric Association shunned any contact with Soviet psychiatrists and denounced the Soviet mental health hospital system every single year until the Soviet Union collapsed. Third, there was no money stream between the Soviet psychiatric system and the West. But there's a quiet gold rush to exploit the growth in China's transplant system through Western sales of bioglue, immunosuppressive drugs, robotics, and until 1 year ago, portable ECMO machines, which Germany specialized in. It is obvious that the Western medical world will continue to legitimize Chinese medical atrocities through organizations such as the Transplantation Society and the World Health Organization, as long as the prospect of financial gain exists. So the first and most critical yes, then, is this. Just as we are forcing Xinjiang cotton and slave laborers out of the Western supply chain, using the same mechanisms, the medical profit connection to Chinese transplants needs to be severed and stitched over. The second yes, we can no longer hold to the idea of exclusively prosecuting doctors, hospitals, and organ brokers for organ tourism to China. Not in the age of Google. People can make their own one-click appointments. So let's stop organ tourism before a crime is committed. Anyone who considers clicking on a glossy Chinese transplant hospital website should be tracked by the FBI as if they were trying to access child pornography. And if they're really doing research, and I'm looking at Matt Robertson right now, they need to be prepared to explain it. The third yes is shun the killers. Bring down the Magnitsky Act. Bring down the border control officers. Chinese transplant surgeons should not be let into our conferences, our universities, and they certainly shouldn't be allowed in the Vatican. We shouldn't have to see Huang Zhifu outside of China again until he's defending himself in The Hague. The fourth yes is don't destroy the World Health Organization or the Transplantation Society. But it's well past time to replace the current Director General of the World Health Organization and to put the Delmonico clique of the TTS out to pasture. There is no law against Western doctors forming associations to build the consensus necessary to achieve the goals that I've just mentioned. And there's no law against assisting such groups either. In fact, this is one of those rare cases, a bit like my field research, where the assistance might even be bipartisan. I'm going to end there and let my colleagues pick up after me. Pick up on the themes that I've mentioned. And thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Ethan, thank you for a splendid presentation on the industrial grade quality of what's being done by the Chinese Communist Party with regard to organ harvesting, and for your very thoughtful prescriptions, both for the no's and the yeses, and we'll talk more about those, I'm sure, in the course of the remainder of this program. I'm pleased to introduce next your colleague in co-founding the important effort that has been made by the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China, known as ETAC. Her name is Susie Hughes. In addition to the great work that she has been doing in that capacity, Susie also served in a key role as the director of logistics, an important role, needless to say, for the 2019 China Tribunal, of which we heard a moment ago, chaired by Sir Geoffrey Nice, which did indeed find the Chinese Communist Party unanimously be guilty of organ harvesting. Susie, it's great to have you with us. Thank you for joining us, especially to build out a bit further the evidence of this crime against humanity and the extent to which it's been perpetrated at, again, industrial grade scale by the Chinese Communist Party. Welcome.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks so much, Frank. It's really fantastic that you're holding the event today, and we really do feel privileged to have been invited to participate. So thank you. So today I'll be providing you with an overview of the China Tribunal, the evidence reviewed and calls to action. The state-sanctioned forced extraction of organs from prisoners of conscience, killing the victims in the process, is an atrocity that has been happening for over 2 decades now. To begin, I'd like to touch upon a few of the blockages that exist or have existed. 1. Multiple reports from credible sources have demonstrated evidence of forced organ harvesting since 2006, and awareness has clearly been building. However, there have been a number of influential voices coming from the international transplantation sector flippantly dismissing these reports and the overwhelming body of evidence, while simultaneously promoting the narrative that China has reformed. 2. When reports of this issue first emerged, trade relationships with China were opening up, with Western corporations and governments seeing China as a revenue source that could not be jeopardized at any cost, even at the cost of human life. 3. The effectiveness of the CCP's dehumanization of the main victim group, the Buddhist Qigong practice of Falun Gong, dehumanization being the 4th stage of genocide, something we also now see in the Chinese state's propaganda against the Uyghurs. 4. Falun Gong was relatively new to the Western world, and many people didn't have an understanding of Eastern spiritual philosophies and religions. 5. People find it hard to grasp that something so insidiously evil could be taking place, with some people finding it a horror that they just want to put out of their mind. And importantly, the fact that the leading international transplant-related organisations accepted China's string of contradictory statements and reform narrative. They've also at times repeated China's claims that the victims have a political agenda. This creates a testimonial injustice that seeks to undermine the credibility of those who have been persecuted, many of whom have been forced to have organ scans in detention and should be supported when they speak out about their experiences. In order to progress the debate, ETAC decided that a legal analysis of all available evidence was needed. ETAC approached distinguished barrister and expert in crimes of mass atrocity, Sir Geoffrey Nice QC, for an independent legal opinion. When we first approached Sir Geoffrey, he recommended that the gravity of the allegations justified a people's tribunal. However, of course, there was no guarantee that the outcome would result in mass crimes being committed. For us, primarily a coalition of lawyers, academics, medical professionals and researchers, it was vitally important to progress the debate about whether China has been killing innocent people for their organs or not. Although the China Tribunal was initiated by ETAC, there was a necessary separation between ETAC and the Tribunal. ETAC was at no stage privy to the Tribunal's deliberations, and counsel to the Tribunal, Mr. Hamid Sabi, acted as a shield between ETAC and the Tribunal. All evidence submitted was via the Tribunal Council. Specifically, the Tribunal's mandate was to hear and assess evidence to determine whether forced organ harvesting is occurring in China, and if so, what, if any, international crimes had been committed. So over 12 months, the China Tribunal reviewed multiple lines of evidence and conducted 5 days of public hearings in London. I sometimes speak with people who think that the only evidence is the blood tests of the Falun Gong practitioners in detention, but the evidence goes much further than that. So where does the evidence begin? Prior to the year 2000, there were few transplants in China, with numbers gradually increasing following advances in immunotherapy. During this period, organs were primarily sourced from death row prisoners. However, An investigation by Human Rights Watch in 1994 reported that other non-violent criminals and political prisoners were also drawn into the organ pool during that time. They found that Chinese doctors participated in pre-execution medical tests and matching of prisoners with recipients, often on a first paid, first served basis, and that executions were deliberately mishandled to ensure that prisoners were not yet dead when their organs were removed. This was already happening before the persecution of Falun Gong even began. From 2000, there was a rapid increase in the number of transplants. The source of the organs underpinning this high level of activity has never been explained in a credible way by the Chinese government, with the number of transplants taking place far exceeding the number of death row prisoners executed. Of great concern, the increase in transplant activity coincided with the repression and mass arrest of practitioners of the Buddhist Qigong practice of Falun Gong during the 2000s. So broadly speaking, the lines of evidence examined by the China Tribunal include but are not limited to the following. Evidence of medical testing that includes organ scanning, CT scans, X-rays and ultrasounds, primarily of Falun Gong practitioners in custody, but also more recently of the Uyghur people. There are also testimonies that Falun Gong practitioners have been forced to have blood tests in their own homes. Investigations analysing information from official Chinese websites such as bed utilisation rates, hospital revenue and transplant infrastructure indicate China is conducting far more transplant operations than their official claims. Undercover investigations conducted in Chinese hospitals show transplant tourism is taking place and organs are available on demand. More technical medical evidence indicating that a so-called donor was killed rather than died of natural causes. Involvement of the military in transplant activity and research, websites where hospitals advertised transplant services to foreigners on a pre-scheduled basis, including for heart transplants, telephone investigations to Chinese transplant specialists confirming waiting times as short as 2 weeks, with some calls stating that Falun Gong organs are available. In one forensically examined phone call, for example, the former PLA Minister for Health Bai Shuzhong stated that ex-President Jiang Zemin directly ordered the killing of Falun Gong practitioners for their organs, and we'll be hearing more from Dr. Wang about his investigations soon. There is also a statistical analysis that shows current official Chinese organ donation data has been manipulated and does not represent the real numbers. So as mentioned by Ambassador Bremberg, the China Tribunal concluded in part that forced organ harvesting has been committed for years throughout China on a significant scale. Falun Gong practitioners have been one and probably the main source of organ supply, and the vulnerability of the Uyghurs to being used as a bank of organs is also obvious. To quote China Tribunal member Andrew Koo after the judgment was issued, "The overall value of the collective body of evidence is greater than the mere sum of its parts. Individual lines of evidence, when brought together, paint a backdrop of planned, systematic, institutional and intentional killing of innocent people for their organs." The tribunal also found that this amounted to crimes against humanity. No, and this really is a crime against all of humanity. It is our responsibility as global citizens to do all that we can to stop it, not only to fulfill our human duty to help others, but also so we don't head towards a future where forced organ harvesting becomes normalised and spreads to other regions. A situation where certain citizens, good people who are deemed enemies of the state, are held captive as a commodity, nothing more than a crop of body parts to be harvested. Post the China Tribunal judgment, evidence continues to emerge indicating that forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience continues. There is currently still no transparency in China's organ transplantation system. Even if the Chinese government does reform at some point, there still needs to be accountability for the crimes that have been committed over the past 2 decades. So what can and must be done? Legislation needs to be put in place banning organ trafficking and transplant tourism, with components of mandatory reporting to ensure transplant tourism is tracked. Universities and hospitals should abide by their business and human rights obligations. Partnerships with China in relation to transplant medicine, research and training are increasing. Policy is urgently needed so that collaborations do not take place in relation to organ transplantation. Any institutions already collaborating should disassociate immediately. Chinese transplant surgeons should not be allowed to participate in international transplant conferences, nor should they be allowed to partake on decision-making groups within leading international bodies, such as the Declaration of Istanbul Custodian Group, the Transplantation Society, or the WHO, where they currently have representation. Resolutions should be passed by governments around the world condemning forced organ harvesting in China, urging both international bodies and the public to act, and Chinese perpetrators should be sanctioned. Governments should request answers from the WHO on their current position, that China's current transplant system is ethical, considering that it was revealed in a UK House of Lords debate just last year that the evidence the WHO bases their advice on to governments around the world is provided by the Chinese authorities themselves. UN member states should abide by the legal obligations of the treaties they have signed under the Genocide Convention, the Convention Against Torture, and they should uphold their obligations under the UN Responsibility to Protect. So these are only some of the actions that need to take place to prevent others from being entangled in China's transplant crimes, to urgently protect those who are still at risk, and to ultimately bring justice to those whose lives have been lost. So thank you very much for having me today. It's really fantastic to be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing the other speeches and the discussion. Thank you.
And Susie, thank you. This is a really important contribution. You've very nicely summarized the work of the tribunal and its import. And we're going to drill down still further on evidence of what has gone on here and why the findings of the tribunal are not only correct but so vitally needed. By talking with Dr. Jiwan Wang. He is the president of the World Organization to Investigate the Persecution of Falun Gong. He has the distinction of having formerly served in the Chinese People's Liberation Army as a medical doctor. And in his role as a doctor, he has, of course, spent decades, I believe 3 of them, really studying how to save lives. He's now devoted about 10 years of his life to assessing the horror and implications of medical doctors with whom he formerly served, in some cases, I believe, actually sacrificing lives deliberately, purposefully, for the benefit of the Chinese Communist Party as they harvested organs forcibly from Falun Gong and others. He is the author of a new book, Ironclad and Irrefutable Evidence, which reveals an almost unimaginable truth, namely that China's medical personnel, hospitals, judiciary, and military have worked comprehensively for the purposes of sacrificing large numbers of Falun Gong practitioners through this horror of organ harvesting. Dr. Wang is going to speak to us briefly in Mandarin, and his remarks will be translated by our final panelist, Dr. Sean Lin, whom I will introduce when he comes up afterwards, following Dr. Wang's comments. Dr. Wang, very welcome to your we very much welcome your participation in this program, and the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. 女士们、先生们，大家好，我叫王志远，我代表追查国际在此报告中共活摘法轮功学员器官、国家群体灭绝犯罪的几个特征。
Okay, everyone, let me interpret for Dr. Wang. So, greetings, everyone. My name is Wang Ziyuan, and on behalf of the World Organization to Investigate the Persecution of Falun Gong, I'm here today to present some of the direct evidence of the Chinese Communist Party's crime of genocide in harvesting organs from living Falun Gong practitioners.
首先呢，我提醒大家注意2个名词的使用：活摘与强摘。
So first, I want to emphasize the difference of 2 terms, live organ harvesting versus forced organ harvesting.
活摘是专指中共摘取法轮功学员的器官，是用取活人器官的方式虐杀法轮功学员。 中共大量活摘法轮功学员器官是群体灭绝罪、反人的罪。
The live organ harvesting refers to the extraction of the organs from living human beings and murdering people brutally in the process. And the CCP's massive live organ harvesting from Falun Gong petitioners is a genocide and crime against humanity.
强摘是强制取器官，并不一定是杀人，也可能是取死人的器官，只是没得到本人或者家人的同意，是属于侵犯人权、违反职业道德的范畴。
The forced organ harvesting is the forced removal of organs. The victims are not necessarily murdered, as organs are possibly taken from the corpse without the consent of the individuals while they were alive, or the consent from their family members. So it pertains to the field of human rights violation and the violation of professional ethics.
所以，强摘是中共愿意接受，并且有意炒作的用词，意在转移视听，避重就轻，化解活摘这个群体灭绝罪的一个策略。当然，中共并没有直接承认他自己是强摘，但他一直说他是摘的死旧器官。可是呢，人们很自然的就会把摘取死旧器官和强摘联系在一起，把活摘误解为强摘。
Therefore, forced organ harvesting is a term that the CCP is willing to accept, and it has purposefully hyped it up in order to divert people's attention to its relatively minor crimes and hide the serious ones. It is a strategy to dissolve its genocide crime of live organ harvesting. Of course, the CCP did not directly admit that they were engaging in forced organ harvesting, but people would naturally associate harvesting organs from death row inmates with forced organ harvesting, and mistake live organ harvesting for forced organ harvesting.
所以我在这里提醒各位以及在线上的世界各地的朋友们，注意用词上不要给中共留有可乘之机。
So here I want to remind everyone, we need to keep in mind the difference between these two terms, so that we won't let the CCP took advantage of the difference of these two terms and hide their serious crimes.
好，下面我就请林小旭先生帮助我代读我今天的发言稿。好，谢谢。
Okay, now to save time, Dr. Wang asked me to just read his presentation in English. So, Dr. Wang testimony. And so, first of all, I would like to ask everyone a question. When and where in the world did the number of organ transplants grow exponentially for the first time in human history? And the answer is 1999 in China. In more than 20 years periods before 1999, the cumulative number of liver transplant cases in China was only 135 cases. That means an average of 5 to 6 cases per year. There were 78 cases of liver transplants during the 8-year period from 1991 to 1998, an average of 9.7 cases per year. And China was one of the most underdeveloped states in the organ transplant field. However, since the end of 1999, the number of cases grew at an exponential rate. From 1999 to 2006, there were 14,085 liver transplants during the 8-year period, an average of more than 1,760 cases per year, which translates into an increase about 180 times from the previous 8 years period, and in some hospitals, even several thousand times more. So please note that the number mentioned above are from public government records, and the real numbers are even more alarming. So let's use the example of Tianjin First Center Hospital. From 1994 to 1998, only 8 cases of liver transplant were performed in this hospital. So however, starting from 1999, the total number of the transplants had grown exponentially in this hospital. And the hospital's new building for transplantation increased its bed availability from 120 to more than 500. The bed occupancy rate was also said to be over 90%, and the highest record was 131%. The average hospitalization time for patients going through surgeries was 25 to 30 days. So according to this data, the actual number of operations per year exceed 5,000. And during the peak period, there were 8,000 cases per year just for this center. And also, there are two extremely alarming numbers I want to mention. The first is an extremely short waiting time. And also the second one is a donor organ waiting time is about 1 to 2 weeks. Why do we say this is shocking? If we take a look at the United States numbers, United States, the most developed countries in organ transplantation industry, and average waiting time is 2 years for a liver, and then 3 years for a kidney on Americans' land. But in China, there are very, very short waiting time, and also there are unique situations for the organ harvesting in China. One, the patients can even choose organ donors. They can select young and high-quality organ donors. Second, some of the surgeries even have several backup organs and even prepare a couple of living persons as backups. Third, several surgery operations usually performed simultaneously. Some of the hospitals even does 24 liver and kidney transplants within the same day. So it is a very common phenomenon. In 2014, there were 42 hospitals that reported similar numbers. And very shockingly, some centers even offer free liver transplant promotions. For example, in April 2006, Hunan People's Hospital launched a commercial advertisement for 20 free liver and kidney organ transplantations. And in 2017, Jilin University also launched a promotion ad for free transplantations. So this phenomenon is not just a rare case. They are happening all over China. After 1999, across different provinces, cities, and autonomous regions, all the organ transplant centers belonging to the militaries, armed police forces, and local hospitals began to massively perform organ transplanting operations. And a large number of hospitals not qualified to perform transplants are also involved, such as Chinese medicine hospitals, hospitals belonging to the judiciary systems, children's hospitals, county-level hospitals, specialty hospitals, they all involved in organ harvesting. For example, in Gongyi City, which is a very small county-level city in Henan province, a kidney transplant center was established in the city in its Chinese medicine hospital in 2001. And it is capable of accommodating 12 kidney transplant patients at the same time and performing 8 transplants per day. By 2006, the director of the urological surgery department, Li Hongdao, had already performed more than 500 kidney transplants in merely 5 years in such a small county-level hospital. And before 2010 in China, almost no one donated organs. Until now, very few cases happened. An official donation organization in China, the Red Cross, had very few donations, and this number could almost be relatively even ignored. And from August to September 2018, the WOIPFG conducted a phone investigation to Beijing's Red Cross organ donation office. It was found out that the Red Cross donation system was actually still in preparatory stage, and it had never started any actual organ donation work. While at the same time, Beijing has 23 organ transplant hospitals and the largest organ transplant volumes in whole China. So to summarize, since 1999, human race had never had such an exponential organ transplant growth rate, as well as the superior short waiting time and abundant source in any part of China than any other countries. So this is directly related to China's persecution of Falun Gong. Since 1999, under the direction of former CCP top leader Jiang Zemin, the CCP controls state apparatus, including the party, the government, the military, the armed police, the justice and health systems, launched a nationwide genocidal massacre of Falun Gong practitioners in an organized manner through organ harvesting for transplant surgeries in China. And since March 2006, WOIPFG has been continuously investigating into the CCP's state crime of organ harvesting from living Falun Gong petitioners. And as of January 6 this year, the investigation had obtained 730 pieces of recorded audio and video evidence and more than 2,000 pieces of data evidence for the CCP's live organ harvestings. And WOIPFG has obtained 58 pieces of direct evidence concerning the CCP's use of Falun Gong petitioners' organ in transplants. And in those 58 audio recordings, some individuals directly point to the former CCP head Jiang Zemin, who ordered live organ harvesting from Falun Gong petitioners. Some clearly admit to use Falun Gong petitioner organs for transplant, and some are eyewitness to the process of live organ harvesting. Yeah, so pretty much this is the investigation efforts from WOIPFG, and the crime still continues. And let me end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lin, for your help in communicating Dr. Wang's very, very important message. I think what has now been established by our several panelists is the evidence of the actions of the Chinese Communist Party, their magnitude, and their devastating impact on the targeted populations is indisputable. And to develop a little bit further what the implications are of all of that and to further discuss what we should be doing in response, I'm very pleased to welcome back Dr. Shen Lin in his capacity as a panelist and a contributor in his own right. He's a remarkable man, practitioner of Falun Gong, who is a survivor of the Tiananmen Square massacre. He fortuitously was, with help from members of Congress and the State Department, able to finally get released from Chinese prison where he was incarcerated after making a visit back to his motherland back in the early 2000s, as I recall. He has worked as an Army officer, including as a virologist, a medical doctor at Walter Reed, and has obviously insights into both what has been going on within his faith community at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party, and a great appreciation more generally of the threat that the Chinese Communist Party represents to all of us. And welcome your comments at this stage of our webinar. Dr. Lin.
Thank you, Frank. It's my honor to join these distinguished panels. And so glad to speak after Susie and Easons and Dr. Wang. And so they have emphasizing the important final judgment from the China tribunals, and so many investigations have done by Dr. Wang and Easons for many, many years. I really fully respect their work for a long time. And so I just want to emphasizing that the recent press release on June 14 by 12 United Nations Special Rapporteurs, they were human rights experts on tortures, religious freedom, and arbitrary detentions, and other relevant cases, right? They cited credible information that China harvests body organs as a punishment targeting specific ethnic, linguistic, or religious minorities, including Falun Gong. And these minority detainees are reported to be subjected to blood tests, ultrasound exams in the name of health exams, while they were just subjected to various torture and forced labors. So it was very surprising even for many of the prisoners of conscience. They don't understand why you torture me the day before your health exam, right? And the results go into a nationwide living organ source database, and that is used for organ or tissue matches as transplant centers send their own demands. So the CCP has been treating the innocent Chinese people as organ source, not as human beings. And all the incarceration facilities are like active live organ farms to the CCPs. And now we're building the very sophisticated nationwide database. You know, any people who have their information collected into this database can be subjected to organ harvesting if their organs, tissues have a match by the request of a transplant centers. And so just as Ethan mentioned, the Chinese government already even went to Falun Gong practitioners' house in order to collect their biometric information, their biosamples. So Chinese government can be very aggressively targeted anyone. And in addition, CCP has utilized this international organization to promote their propagandas and lies that CCP has established an effective organ donation system in China. And so I also want to emphasize that the World Health Organization, they collaborated with CCP officials to establish this donation and transplantation of human organs and tissues task force. So this special task force become the authority on organ transplants, but they admit Dr. Jiefu Huan, the chairman of China National Organ Donation and Transplant Committees, as well as Dr. Haibo Wang, the director of China Organ Transplant Response Systems, into this task force. And they are actually the initial founding members of the task force. So definitely CCP is collaborating with WHO on this task force. And both of these doctors is well documented to be notorious for deeply engaged in forced organ harvesting in China. And so academic researchers by Maria Chong, Dr. Torsten Chey, and human rights lawyer David Matas have revealed a direct link between the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners and the forced organ harvesting. And they describe the persecution as a cold genocide, a slow-moving, concealed, but nevertheless a destructive form of genocide, which still continues unabated to this day. So in my speech, I want to emphasize this concept of cold genocide for organ harvesting. And through Maria Chan's studies, they found that the cold genocide is a multifaceted strategy that has no bounds as to what means or methods can be used to completely annihilate a target group from society. It is a strategy used by Jiang Zemin, who initiated the persecution of Falun Gong in 1999. And these methods can thoroughly and effectively eradicate Falun Gong practitioners without alerting the international community. And since the CCP acts above and outside the national justice systems and controls all media and means of expression in China, the cold genocide of Falun Gong is invisible to the public, and only those who participated in the persecution are aware of it. So this is a quote directly from their study. So, and also a little background on Falun Gong, because many people wonder why Falun Gong is being targeted for this genocide. So Falun Gong is ancient Chinese spiritual practice. It embraced the core values of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. In Chinese, we call it Zhen Shang Ren. And it has suffered more than 2 decades of brutal crackdown and the cold genocide since 1909, simply because Falun Gong groups has outgrown the Chinese Communist Party by the end of 1999. And also, Falun Gong practitioners have their own spiritual belief and have their own independent thinking, very different from what the CCP wants. They want the control, they want the mind control for all Chinese people. And so the persecution of Falun Gong is actually a clear evidence of the criminal and evil nature of the Communist Party. And in terms of policy-wise, I want to echo the recent calling from Ms. Nina Shea, the senior fellow at Hudson Institute and a director of the Center for Religious Freedom. And so Ms. Nina Shea stated, in January 2021, the then Secretary of State Pompeo determined that the Chinese Communist Party is committing genocide against predominantly the Muslim Uyghurs and other ethnic and religious minority groups in Xinjiang, a determination that Secretary Blinken affirmed soon afterwards. So now, mounting evidence from the variety of respected sources leads to the irrefutable conclusion that Beijing is working to physically destroy Falun Gong. This meets the genocide definition under international law, and Secretary Blinken should immediately direct his Department of Global Criminal Justice to review the United Nations experts' findings and extensive published reportings to make a Falun Gong genocide determination, along with appropriate sanctions, end of quote. So, this is a very important calling. I definitely want to emphasize this one. And we, from Eastern government's presentation, we also understand the medical society is not respond enough to the final judgment from all the publications regarding the organ harvesting. And I also want to echo that the International Medical Society should apply distrust and verify principles in any engagement with Chinese counterparts. And probably also other international organizations in scientific, artistic, or economic fields should also apply these principles when they deal with the Chinese Communist parties. And for medical institutions, if they still have collaboration with Chinese counterparts, they should not simply try to ease the pressure by simply asking Chinese surgeons to sign the ethical pledge when they are in the United States. There's no guarantee they won't commit the crime of organ harvesting when they go back to China. And also, I think people should not simply deny the existing of the organ harvesting by saying no independent investigation have been done by WHO or any kind of excuse. Sometimes just need a common sense. People understand there's definitely something wrong in a very short waiting time for organ transplant with abundant source of the organs killing by demand system established in China. And I was actually very impressed by Professor Jacob Levy from Israel. He advocated in Israel to pass a law that forbids insurance company paying coverage for organ source from China. And he just knew from common sense, because he have a patient who go to China to get a heart transplant. And this actually can be pre-scheduled. And this is ordered in demand, right, for heart transplant in China. Just from this common sense, he knows definitely there are crime of organ harvesting happening in China. So I also want to echo the efforts from Victim of Communist Memorial Foundation, also End Transplant Abuse Coalition, to call for more community support for the pending bipartisan bill in the United States Congress to combat the forced organ harvesting. And this bill is sponsored by Representative Chris Smith, Tom Suozzi, Vicky Hasler, and also Senators Tom Cotton and Chris Combs. And I want to also pass a little bit positive message for everyone. Many Falun Gong petitioners in different regions have tried a lot of efforts to raise awareness about organ harvesting. And recently, many Falun Gong petitioners in Virginia, they have took initiative to educate local communities about the crime of organ harvesting and have received tremendous support. So far, 9 counties in Virginia have passed resolution to support Falun Gong and condemn the forced organ harvesting. And so this is a very encouraging situation, and definitely we encourage more people with conscience and can step forward to contact their congressional office to support these bipartisan bills in both House and Senate. And the crime of live organ harvesting is so horrible, it should shock the collective conscience of all people. So I believe if we united, we can expose more crime of the CCP and end the live organ harvesting and the cold genocide in China. Thank you very much. Frank, you probably muted.
There we go. Apologize. I think somebody else was magically unmuting me previously, so I'm sorry that I didn't understand that wasn't happening this time. Thank you for this important additional contribution, and I especially value the quoting from Nina Shea, who is, of course, one of our country's foremost champions of religious freedom, and her call for what's happening here to be recognized for what it is, as genocide against the Falun Gong practitioners and others, I think is a very, very important addition to our conversation. would like to invite those in the audience to send Sehun Kim any questions you may have. We'll try to cover them in the remaining time we have. I have, in the meantime, a few of my own that I would like to just go through, and I'll throw them out, and anyone who would like to comment, we don't all need to, but anybody who would like to comment, feel free to do so. I think, one of the things that was so impressive about Ethan Gutman's contribution was the documentation of the industrial scale. I've used that term several times now, but I think it's really important for people to understand. This removes any lingering doubt, it seems to me, whether it's the infrastructure that's been put into place, the airport dedicated lanes, the facilitization of organ tourism, that the Chinese Communist Party, the government of China, is itself directly complicit in, responsible for, and must be held accountable for what is being done in this crime against humanity. Would anybody else like to comment on the extent to which that problem is relevant, particularly when it comes to a determination and punishment for genocidal behavior? Ethan, maybe I could start with you if you have any further thoughts on that.
Well, I think what's interesting about it, just as a sort of preamble, is that, World Organization to Investigate the Persecution of Falun Gong was working on this problem of the trying to come up with a transplant volume number for China, which was not easy because China had for 10 years had claimed 10,000 was the transplant volume of China. And they'd done that for 10 years and it never changed. And me and David Kilgore and David Matus were working on it independently. We had some fantastic people with us, Chinese researchers. But the numbers were remarkably similar. All I can tell you is that, even hospital by hospital, I ended up editing some of the World Organization to Investigate the Persecution of Falun Gong documents, and I was really struck by it. I mean, there were some places where there was differences and so forth, but the numbers were strikingly similar all the way through, and what we were seeing, the kinds of hospitals, the huge volume that the individual hospitals were actually reporting, often in all kinds of weird places like Nurses Weekly, and sort of, they weren't even reporting it on their websites necessarily. Dissertations mentioned how much, this hospital's doing this many a year. So that has been one of the most striking, and that was a kind of a golden era of the research in this area. It was about 2016. The problem, of course, is that every time you reveal something about this, and it makes the press and so forth, the Chinese force shields come up, and you will never be able to do the investigation again, and you have to find another way. And so I think this is something that we're all grappling with, is the difficulty of getting research out there right now. And I suppose at the same time, there is an interesting phenomenon, because Huang Jiefu, who's been mentioned several times now, and as I call him the master of ceremonies, he has master of ceremonies of organ harvesting, though he has a full title, which I don't remember at the moment. And he basically has come to our numbers. Okay, the numbers we came out said it's 60,000 to 100,000. He's now saying it's 40 or 50,000, or that he's projecting 50,000 for next year. So they very quickly, it kind of freed them up to normalize this. You see how these things backfire in a way. Now it's considered normal. Oh yeah, 40,000, they're doing that. That's way above American numbers. It's spectacular numbers. And I think this is one of the kind of the genius of the Chinese Communist Party occasionally, is that they can do this. They've figured out how to simply normalize the thing, accept a certain amount of it, do it in increments, and then pretty soon the World Health Organization accepts it, and everybody else sort of accepts it, and it kind of bleeds down. The WMA doesn't raise a peep about it. And I think that's one of the big problems we're facing here, is this cold genocide idea. that this has always been a creeping. This transplant structure it just keeps advancing, and it's very relentless. And finally, that there is another aspect to it, which is, we are looking at a dual source now for organs, or triple source. We're looking at executed prisoners, which are still being used for organs. They're just signing a paper now, whereas they didn't before necessarily, and we're not even sure about that. And those are hardcore criminals usually. We're looking at Falun Gong, because I ran into several witnesses in Kazakhstan who mentioned that they'd seen Falun Gong in their camp. There's no question in my mind that they're still harvesting Falun Gong. And they're doing it in East Turkestan. Now, and then finally, of course, the Uyghurs. And to some extent, much lesser, the Kazakhs and the Kyrgyz and Hui. But, that's where we're at. We have the supply is relatively inexhaustible. And for that matter, we don't know about the Tibetans. They've been very, very bad at reporting this. And clearly the Dalai Lama has put up some resistance to bringing this out as an issue. So we don't really have good information on that, though there's a huge population there as well.
Yeah, huge population and huge industrial effort behind exploiting it. Anyone else want to comment on that quickly before we move on?
Frank, it's Christine Dolan. I don't know if you can hear me. Can I jump in here and just ask some questions? Because I think this is...
Christine, no, we can't do that, I'm afraid.
All right.
If you would send a question to Sehun Kim, we'll try to put it into the mix, but we've got to move this thing along. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine.
For your understanding. Appreciate it.
Can we talk offline?
Absolutely. Okay. Sehun, I understand you do have some questions from the audience. Would you go ahead?
Yes. The questions come from our very own Faith McDonald. Question number 1. She asks, can Dr. Lin tell us which counties in Virginia have passed these bills? I would like to encourage for more. The second question is, regarding the yes on stopping tourism, is Google taking any responsibility to monitor or alert the authorities? Although she's not hopeful in that regard.
Yeah, good questions. Sean, over to you first. If it's a long list, maybe we can't do it justice here, but some examples of where you've had success?
Yes, I do have the information quickly. The Shenandoah counties, Frederick counties, Prince Williams, Loudoun, Fauquier, Warren, Spotsylvania, Madison, and Westmoreland, those 9 counties in Virginia. Regarding about Google's, actually, I don't expect Google to do any active roles because Google even hired so many Chinese people working at their so-called fact checkers. I don't think they are doing anything for this.
Yeah, well, and they're working with and for China more generally, of course. They've got a huge investment in artificial intelligence, I believe, among other things in China. Anybody else want to comment on how we might best be making known to people? I was particularly impressed. I think it was Susie who talked about. Our friend Nina Shea talked about the possibility of using. Nope, I know it's somebody else, but remind me who had the idea that we can use insurance companies as leverage, assuming that there is a flow of information about who's getting these transplants, drying up, in other words, the market for these organs. Anybody care to comment on that?
I would like to comment. I think that's very difficult because of the medical privacy laws are constantly used in this area. And so that's why this is sort of, I'm not saying it's a well-established plan, it's just something that occurred to me, is to try to go another way, because I know the FBI has been very interested in doing human rights work recently, and they've started to get very involved, particularly in the Uyghur issue. And it occurred to me that this is one area where they really could have an impact. Look, there's a misunderstanding out there that this is all done by sort of these shadowy guys in trench coats who come out and sort of say, I hear you have a problem with your liver and we can take care of that for you. That's not really the way it's done. It is done through Google. These websites are in English. They put out videos advertising themselves in English and to some extent in Arabic as well. They're really pushing the halal organ idea very strongly. They want the business. And so the best way that we can do it, I don't know what they're going to do about this in Saudi Arabia, probably nothing. But for us, we could track that stuff. We could, and it's a legitimate idea. And now I've got a phone.
You've got a phone call that you've got to take. Susie, this brings me to you. You, I think, mentioned biomedical data. One of the things that has been worrying to me particularly, and I think to our Committee on the Present Danger of China more generally, as reflected in a recent webinar we co-sponsored with Women's Rights Without Frontiers and Save the Persecuted Christians, is this social credit system as a vehicle for aggregating and mining and exploiting biomedical data. And there's some of us who are concerned that that may turn up here shortly in vaccine passports as well. But talk a little bit about how you see that, featuring in this industrial enterprise of the Chinese Communist Party, organ harvesting.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Look, I think it's it's this mass surveillance, isn't it? In the early days, I suppose it was easier for example, for Falun Gong practitioners to get out of the country, when we had sort of paper passports and this sort of thing. But the situation's completely different now. And, talking about the social credit system and the sort of tracking and the tracking of people's every movement, really, private details, all of that. But also, the situation with the Uyghurs and Falun Gong practitioners now, it's the surveillance is far greater, and the technology is far more advanced than it's ever been before. So, in lots of ways, it just makes it, their crimes even more hidden. And the sort of power the state has over the people in China is even greater. So I think it's one of those areas where, sort of tracking back to your previous question, we really have to take responsibility for that outside of China. We really do. Business and human rights obligations is something that people look at when they talk about forced labour, for example. But, the universities and hospitals, the medical devices companies, the list is endless, really should be taking responsibility themselves at looking at, who are they doing business with? They need to be sure, absolutely sure, that, not one single organ is being used in any research. We have an example, for example, at Alberta University, there was a situation there, and a professor of transplantation testified to the China Tribunal that, a collaboration was about to take place. He should have been the person making the decision in the first place. He sort of found out about it at the last minute. And basically, he said to the university, he said to the TTS and the WHO, and this was through Professor Delmonico as well, if it cannot be guaranteed that every single organ that's used is ethical, then we can't go ahead. It doesn't matter how much it's worth to the university, we can't go ahead with this, and in fact they didn't. And it's a fantastic example, and it's what every single university should be doing. So it's sort of, I think the two issues, the fact that this surveillance is happening is another key warning that, we really need to act. We need to move quickly.
Yeah. Lest, as you say, Susie, this all be normalized and proliferated well beyond China, quite possibly. Is there evidence, speaking of which, that the Chinese are trying to export this practice to some of the nations that they are now, I think of it as enslaving through their Belt and Road Initiative? Are they interested in getting not just halal donors, but donors that may be of a different ethnicity or race, for that matter, than those in China, in places like Africa or Central Asia, where they have now built this, speaking of industrial grade infrastructure, through their colonial empire building Belt and Road Initiative? Anybody?
Yes, actually, sorry. Susie, go ahead.
Sean?
No, I was going to pass over to you, Sean, and Ethan for that one.
Okay.
Definitely.
Good.
Thank you.
Sean, let's go with you
All
first.
right, thank you. Because Frank, your question definitely remind me of my one experience in New York. One time I actually took a taxi, and the driver is from Pakistan. All right, he was really upset when I told him I was a Chinese, and he said, in Pakistan, even some of the young girls in Pakistan being trapped into China for marriage. It's a fake marriage, but those young girls from Pakistan were actually organ harvested in China, and then kidney lost, and those girls were sent back to Pakistan. It was reported in Pakistan media, and it created huge upset on the Pakistan's people, because Chinese government always say we have a very good relationship with Pakistan, right? But actually, the dark practice, the evil practice of organ harvesting already extended to other people. And so similar reports have been seen regarding about the human trafficking, about, fake marriages and tracking, seducing young girls from Vietnam and other Southeast Asia countries to China. And some of those girls are the victim of organ harvesting as well. And this also reminds me of my recent conversation with a very active Kazakh human rights activist, Saya Kejian. And he told me, he has escaped to Kazakhstan and then finally landed in the United States now. And he told me definitely a lot of the Kazakh people in Xinjiang area know that organ harvesting is happening in the so-called re-education camp or training camps in Xinjiang area. And they know they are not only just the Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and also some Falun Gong practitioners being incarcerated there, and they are subject to organ harvesting. The people just disappeared, and they know very well the Chinese government are very, very, you can have a big appetite for halal organs as well. Yeah, so it's very, very bad situation. Yeah, it's spreading everywhere. If we are not stop organ harvesting in China, you can see this dark practice spreading all over the world. And you probably see in the last few years, so many movies, documents talk about organ harvesting now. It never happened before.
Yeah, well, it's needed, needless to say. Sehun, did we get a question from Christine Dolan or anybody else in the audience? I think we have time for perhaps one more.
Yes, we did. And and just as a house rule, since we only have 7 minutes left, please answer these questions as brief as you can. So I will amalgamate all these questions together. Basically, the questions goes that China's transplanting plan effect to the Southeast Asia, including trafficking in person, also in the region is suffering on it. How can we prevent and protect fundamental human rights on these people? And the question that we also have from Ms. Christine is that have any of you found links between laboratories working on bioweapons or even Wuhan lab and organ trafficking beyond the military link? And just to wrap it up, the other question comes.
I'm not sure we'll get to one more. Sehun, let's just see if we can get to, I think the second of those two is probably one that we haven't covered. Would anybody like to comment on the possible tie-in of what they're doing here in the organ harvesting with their biological warfare program?
Early on in the Uyghur investigation, started in 2008, 2009, I ran into several doctors who were outside of the country, and they were in conferences, and I was able to interview them on a confidential basis. And 3 of them mentioned being told to go into the countryside, to very, very obscure areas of East Turkestan, really, really remote areas, little one-room schoolhouses, that kind of thing, and they'd have to take blood samples from all the kids. Okay. Each one of them described exactly the same story. They were in different regions. And I said, well, what's going on here? Why did they do this? And each one of them said it's for a bioweapon, some sort of genetic bioweapon. Now, I thought, well, that's my next book. It wasn't, because I went to some people I know in the intelligence community who really know, and they said, Ethan, this is a great subject for a book, and you're right. but you'll never be able to prove it. And I think that's a real problem. And it may not mean that much. I mean, anybody who's studied the Soviet Union knows that they've been up to all sorts of insane biowarfare elements, and they were always, getting them out of the lab as well, the same way we've seen probably with COVID. But I do believe that this is a real thing. Yeah, I mean, I believe they've been working on this for some time. Now, does it mean they'd ever use it? I have no idea. But failing, if China goes into a war, if China has some sort of global war and people get distracted, I don't put anything past them. We're talking about 9 crematoriums sitting there ready to use. They've pretty much taken most of the Uyghur population outside of the country, aside from the U.S. and Europe, and brought it back into the country, either by people calling up and saying, please come home, your mother's in prison until you explain that you're not up to anything bad. And a lot of them were just, taken across the border. In buses with black windows. Now, what do you make of this? I mean, this is when people talk about genocide, it's such a dramatic term and it's overused and so forth, and I get all that. But we really are on the edge of this here, okay?
Absolutely.
And
Ethan, let me just interrupt you because we're hard out of time. Just to conclude on my part, I want to say, I think what the panel, Ambassador Bremberg, all of you have really persuasively conveyed is that we are looking at genocide on an epic scale with vast implications both for the people most immediately involved, those being persecuted, those being simply trafficked for the purpose of, making money for the Chinese Communist Party, but also for the world because of what the Chinese Communist Party intends to do to the rest of us, as I think exemplified by this kind of conduct towards their own people. I'm fond of saying that any country that treats its own people terribly is not likely to be very considerate of others. Last point, I think, on the biological warfare thing, Ethan, I hope you don't give up on that. I think there's a lot more evidence today of what the Chinese are doing in this area, and those crematoria may have a lot to do with this effort, apparently, of the Chinese Communist Party to tailor biological weaponry to certain ethnicities for specific genocidal purposes. With that, I'm going to wrap up by saying, Sehun, thank you for your help in putting this together, as well as, of course, all of the panelists. A really important program, and I hope it will be widely shared. Back to you, Sehun.
Thank you so much, Frank. And thank you, everyone, for participating in this very, very important panel. Just as we wrap up this program, we'd like to, as a public announcement, like to let everyone know of a very, very important development within the Committee on Present Danger China and the Captive Nations Coalition, in which I'm the director. Through main help of our Executive Secretary, Didi Laugesen, and myself, and also Frank as well, we have recently published a report on the Belt and Road Initiative. And some of the countries that are mentioned in our report covers a vast amount of information that has to do with the CCP's expansions all over the world. And the fact that we had this panel today talking about one of the most egregious aspects of the CCP's expansion in the world, namely the forced organ harvesting. We believe that it was one of the most important, if not one of the few obligated things that we ought to do as people of the free world and as those who are standing in the morally right side of history. And so with that, we would like to ask everyone to please visit captivenations.org as well as presentdangerchina.org for more information. And again, we would like to thank everyone for participating in this greatly needed panel. And we hope that more action will be taken. Yes.
And so can I make a last advertisement here?
Please, go ahead.
This is for Dr. Wang regarding his newly released book in English. So I think it's a good concluding point too, if any of the audience want to know more about the evidence. So Dr. Wang has a new book called Ironclad and Irrefutable Evidence. And so he has this book in Chinese and English and also in documentary video as well. So these series of books, videos exposing CCP's organ harvesting from live Falun Gong petitioner in China. It's a collection of more than a decade of investigation by WOIPFG, and it includes recording of evidence from 5 committees of the Politburo of Chinese Communist Party Central Committees, and also the former head of the Health Division of the Department of Central Military Commissions, the Political Committee, the Legal Committees, the 610 Office, Courts, on-site witness, and also evidence from 45 hospital presidents, department directors, doctors from 41 organ transplant hospitals in China. So it's just a very informative resource that provides a comprehensive understanding and in-depth study of the CCP's crime of live organ harvesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we hope to see all of you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Recording has stopped.
Thank you, everyone, for participating in this very, very important panel, and thank you especially to Frank for moderating
everyone.
this.
Thank you,
and
Ambassador.
thank you especially to Ambassador Bremberg. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.